right, Katie, you should be, it should show you as N. Hi. Hello. So I have made you a co-host, which allows you to unmute yourself whenever you want.
Okay.
Okay, good, it worked. I wanted to make sure. And then do you want to change your name again, or do you want to leave it as Katie?
You could just leave it as that.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
Okay.
Might confuse people, but
that's okay.
That'll be okay.
And I don't know if I'm gonna have anyone else helping me with tech. So it's just, I think just me, unless they email Annie, or sorry, talking to Annie, unless they email Rose.
Okay.
But I think we're gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
At like 1 minute after, I'll let everyone in from the waiting room.
Okay.
But right now they are all on hold until so you give me the signal. Okay. And is there anything you need from me?
Unfortunately, my cat's in a mood right now, so he probably will be meowing pretty consistently throughout. Sorry about that.
It's fine. I love it. I have a cat and she loves to make an entrance, so it's fine.
Yeah, he's dying to go outside right now and I'm not letting him. But no, I think I'm good.
Okay. Do you need anyone else? Is Lucia in co-facilitating this, or is it just you?
Just me this time.
Okay.
But he has had a part in this workshop before, so
okay.
But just me.
Okay, great. I'm gonna also Rose looks like she's here, so I'm gonna make her co-host just in case we need anything.
Okay, awesome.
And I better start the transcription. So that's going, and then so just in case you didn't hear the very automated sound just now, we are recording this session. And I'm gonna make this bigger. There we go. All right, so hello, welcome. My name is Naomi Aladeff. I'm a board member for MEEA and a host for this session. I work with the National Wildlife Federation as the Montana Education Manager here in Missoula. I will be monitoring the chat and doing my best to manage any tech issues that arise. Hopefully there will be none. If you do have any problems and for some reason I can't fix it, please do email Rose. She will be available via email. I believe she's also on this call with us right now. Just a few quick Zoom norms. You are muted at the moment. And at the end, when we do a Q&A, or Katie, whenever you are ready, you just let me know, I can unmute people. But you are muted at the moment, mostly for a clean recording. And then if you have questions, please drop them in the chat, and there will be a Q&A at the end. Again, we are recording. If you do not want to be recorded, we will be sharing this externally. Please feel free to go ahead and take your camera off and rename or rename yourself. If you don't mind and are joining us, sorry. Please feel free to rename yourself with your organization as well as any pronouns that you feel comfortable sharing. You're not obligated to be on camera, of course, but we would love to see your shiny faces. With Zoom, it's so hard. We're not in a room together, and this is the best way we can get like that body language. So please feel free to join us on Zoom. Again, at the top right of your screen is the button to toggle your view between gallery or speaker. I will be spotlighting Katie when she's ready. And then at the bottom of your screen are the reaction buttons, which include clapping, happy face. You can even raise your hand if you have a virtual question to ask. And then lastly, I have the honor today of introducing our presenter for this session, Annie Sorrell. And did I say that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, and I'm gonna hand the baton over. If anyone has any questions, I look forward to talking to you via chat.
Hesselthalt Pesia, Annie Sorrell through East West. Good day, everyone. My name is Annie Sorrell. I am a tribal member from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes at the Flathead Reservation in northwestern Montana. On top of that, I have a podcast with Leja Fistico that maybe you guys had listened to in the beginning keynote session. Also a master's student at the State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry. While I'm getting my degree in conservation biology, I am part of a cohort that is focusing on the idea of biocultural restoration. So really focusing on how culture and societies play a role into restoration and ecology efforts. On top of that, I'm also professionally a visitor service manager for a Department of Interior for one of a refuge. So I kind of touch base a lot with environmental education. And I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I'm going to be kind of talking Indigenous science and academic science, learning to see with both eyes. This is a workshop that I have been doing with my cohort for the last 3 years. We have done this workshop multiple different settings at an agency level, as a school setting, tour setting, in multiple different settings. So it's kind of weird for me to be the only one talking, especially when the information that we have had has been built upon not only the last few years, but over the last thousands of years as well. This is usually where we would start our Where We Stand protocol. It's kind of a land acknowledgement or territorial acknowledgement. While COVID is allowing us to be more remote and being our own areas, it has changed how we will do this. Just in case if you don't know what a land acknowledgement is, it is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and enduring relationships that have existed between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. So I will just say that I am standing on the traditional territory of Salish Kootenai, as well as many other tribes that's corridor as kind of a food and trade access. And I highly suggest that you as well take this moment to think about the land that you are on and what Indigenous people have been there since time immemorial, and kind of think about that as we kind of have this discussion on learning about new worldviews and different views in science. Like I had said earlier, I am from the Flathead, Montana, from the Flathead Reservation, and these are our Mission Mountains. I have been lucky enough to have this as my backyard for 30 years now. I bounce around a lot, but this is always will be my home. I, in previous talks, have said that Leja and I won't be where we are unless the people that have helped us get to where we are and our ancestors. And I find that to be very true, because since the day I was born, these mountains have been saved for future generations. And Doug Allard, who was part of the Save the Mission Mountains committee in the 70s, played a big part in my father's life and in my life. And so this quote has been around with me my whole life, and it has really changed how I look at land and environmental education. And it says that these mountains belong to our children, and when our belong to their children. In this way, for this reason, they are sacred. And the idea of land being sacred, it may be a new concept to a lot of people, but for Indigenous people, it has been a concept since time immemorial. And then I'm going to bring you to some more people. This is my cohort of people that have done this presentation in one way or another for the last 3 years and have drastically changed how I look at land, how I look at environmental education, and how I want my career to be. They're very diverse backgrounds, 5 different tribes, 6 different tribes, Russian. Also, we have Irish, Scottish, Welsh as well. So a wide variety of Indigenous groups that aren't only the typical Indigenous communities that are thought about. And the last one that I do want to talk about is Iduamatuk. And this is an idea of two-eyed seeing. And it was kind of created by this man, this Mi'kmaq elder named Albert Marshall in 2004. And when we had come across this idea, being an Indigenous student, we face a lot of this idea called walking in two worlds. So you have this idea that you have to walk in a science world and walk in your native cultural world. And for a long time, it was very separate. And so coming across this idea of strictly merging the two, and then how do you see with 2 different eyes? And Albert came up with this idea because he sees that from one eye, you can see the strength from Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, but in the other eye, you can see the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing. And then both eyes together, we can benefit for all. And so having this kind of mainframe advantage point of kind of coming about this idea of seeing with 2 eyes is nothing new to us. It's not a mythology. It's just a thought and a concept that the group of cohort and I have built upon to kind of help, especially environmental educators, interact with their students in a way that provides not only just one, but multiple knowing. And usually what we do is questions. So usually we have a lot more time where we can ask questions and people can interact with us. But this is our pre-survey questionnaire that we usually ask people in the beginning to just kind of open their eyes to understanding different worldviews. And as we all are educators in some sort of environmental fields, I just kind of want you to yourself, name a place that is important to your work as an educator. And then I want you to think about how much do you know about Indigenous relationships with that place? And also, do you use science to teach in that place? And if yes, what so? And then do you use Indigenous science when you teach in that place? And if yes, how so? And so just kind of think of these 3 questions to your place, not to the place that I have mentioned, because we will have very different opinions and ideas about what our place is important to us when we are considering environmental education. Just think about it as we kind of go through this. I'm hoping not to be a little bit too heady, but it just kind of will be like a fun understanding of 2 differences and then coming together and merging as one at the end. So this is like, they're kind of blurry, but this is my family and my experiences that I've had, because I have been taught a lot that ecological knowledge is valid, and knowledge is valid. And my knowledge that I learned from my elders in my family are valid. And so in the top pictures, it's our medicine tree on the left. Our medicine tree is extremely important to all Salish people and is located in the Bitterroot Valley. It is right next to a busy road, and you really get to see how cultural history is impacted by modern day vehicles and kind of the perception when you are right next to this very important historic tree that is for a long time been avoided by non-Indigenous members. I also had the opportunity to work with the Onondaga Nation farm crew. They have a great crew that is really pushing towards food sovereignty, and especially heritage seeds, getting seeds back to the people, making sure that they have enough food for 7 years. And then my mom and me at my school. And then in the bottom picture is kind of our last trip before COVID, where it's my family and in our last husks adventure in Lolo National Forest, where these three men, I guess, have really stepped up and impact my family and us, kind of guide our new paths. If you don't kind of know what TEEP is, just a quick definition, it's the evolving body of knowledge on hundreds or thousands of years of close observations of ecosystem by Indigenous people. We kind of have this interesting concept with words. I mean, words have multiple meanings. So some people are now moving more towards Indigenous knowledge, which is kind of refers more to the local knowledge of Indigenous people, to unique or local areas group. So kind of the same thing, two different definitions that will probably be used interchangeable. So I just kind of like for people to know both of them. And then as we had talked about before, the honorable harvest itself is extremely important when it comes to Indigenous perspectives on land. And while that's not the only one, it is the one that many people who are non-Indigenous can use when they are finding and building connections to their own land. But if you're looking at how Indigenous people perceive their own land, they do consider themselves stewards of the land, making everything is in order, conservation, as well as reciprocity. And so that kind of leads us to the 3 R's. And the 3 R's, you can have 4 R's, 5 R's, but the ones that we tend to do are respect, responsibility, and reciprocity. And all of those 3 R's kind of build into this giant R, which is relationship, and also probably like respect too. So you can resiliency. There's a lot of R's that can be added into this section. One of the major ones that I had talked about kind of with the Doug Allard quote is generational responsibilities, and making sure to ensure the land for future generations. Throughout my last 10 years in academia, trying to learn more about my own indigeneity and how I learned to enhance my own connection to the land, one of the few things that has always popped up is to make sure that our land and our resources are there for future generations. It is the highlight of most people that I talk with. And then also it is learning from the land. I have had some amazing conversations with Robin, and a lot of Robin Kimmerer's conversations are just her and her learning from the land, just being in the land, hearing and listening, and making sure that you're observing what you see when you are in that location. Oh. So one of the things that we do kind of like to explain to people is the differences, just so that people can see how different 2 worldviews can be when including it into a very specific research project. In Indigenous science, it is more holistic and qualitative. You're going to think more about the social science of it. You're going to want to know about the community engagement. You're going to want the community to be involved from the beginning of the research project. You're going to want to know about the whole ecosystem. It's not just one part of it, but you're going to want to know about the water, the land, rocks, the people, culture, everything that is part of that research project where you're working. Where in academic science, well, these academic science isn't made to look bad. It's just how throughout the year, personal, cultural aspects from it. And so with academic science, it is more reductionist and quantitative. You're going to want to know N values. You're going to want to know data sets. And those all have a specific purpose as well. For Indigenous science, it's usually generated by the user. And what we need by generated by the user is that usually the person who is going to be coming into the community will have reached out to the community and talked to the community. and then built it from themselves. Where in academic science, it seems like, especially in undergrad professional that you are under, who has or kind of the research project laid out. So you already have an idea of how to move forward. And then in time, Indigenous science is circular. It emphasizes on cycle, regeneration, and processes. A great example of that is seasonal rounds. Seasonal rounds are different for every single tribe, and it is based on what is available for that season and ensuring that there is sustainability on the land for the entire year. Where in academic science, it is kind of linear. There's an emphasis on growth, progress, and outcomes. So you will kind of have a set time frame. Usually in restoration projects, we know it's about 5 or 10 years. And after that, it's kind of stopped. So once you get to that growth and that progress, you're kind of stepping away from it. Indigenous science is integrated and applied to daily living. A lot of this applies with harvesting, especially when it comes to ceremonial or aromatic plants that are necessarily every day with sneeze. And then academic science, I have over the last year done a lot of interviews, been on interview panels. And one of the things that I've heard the most is that these people want experience. While they have the academic book smart, they don't have the means to apply it to that daily life when you're out there. And so finding that way to connect is kind of that crossing of the two-eyed seeing. With Indigenous science, as we talked about, oral transmissions, whether that's oral traditions or histories, a lot of them is verbal talking. When academic science is through journals, books, reports, and papers. Decision-making, 7 generations. If you haven't heard of what 7 generations is in decision-making, there's a few ways to take it. The way that I take it is there are 3 generations before me, there are 3 generations after me, and then I am the 7th generation. But what other people have talked about too is there are 7 generations before you, and there will be 7 generations after you. And that is where your time frame lies. So you want to learn from your past while you are the present, and then you want to think for your future. Where in academic science, fiscal years, you have to really work towards grants, contracts, and it's usually just based on your lifetime, really, or maybe your child's lifetime, and maybe even possibly your grandchild's lifetime, but really not thinking past that. Again, the 3 R's, responsibility, respect, reciprocity, where academic science, it does reduce, reuse, and recycle, which are all great. Definitely 3 great R's as well. But it does take out kind of the cultural indications that come with your own connection to land and not necessarily to byproducts of being human itself. And this is a question that we've asked ourselves quite a bit when we have been creating this project. And it was really hard for us to get going because environmental education, especially with Indigenous science, comes with a lot of caveats. Cultural appropriation, what can you do, what can't you do, the stories, who do you talk to, improper education in our high school and elementary years that have led us to have different thoughts and opinions of what Indigenous knowledge is in their ties with environmental education. So we came up with 3 main things. So knowledge combined with values, reducing our impacts as we learn our relationship, and then also place-based values. And place-based values is extremely important because each ecosystem is very unique and you need to learn the values that are associated with your unique ecosystem. And one of the quotes that we have found, because Robin Kimmerer and our cohort are great at trying to restory science, in a way that isn't so heavy when it comes to people reading science papers that aren't in academia. We deal a lot with people that have minimal education, or their education is through the land, and you can't use these big words when you are talking to these people. And so environmental education is about restoring our lives and the land and our relationship to it. Through two-eyed seeing, it also becomes focused on interconnection between peoples, between ways of thought, between human beings and the natural world. And the restoring of it is extremely important. And I know that things are changing now. And I think this conference is a great example of that. And I met Jess at the North American Environmental Education Conference. And I think those are two very great conferences that are showing that there is now a changing of mindset and a changing of worldviews that are allowing us to kind of have this conversation, because before we never were able to have a seat at the table. And as Indigenous people, we just want to be able to be included and have our knowledge valued, just like all of academic science. And then that kind of brings us to our own stories, and where do our own stories lie? And storying itself is important when it comes to place. My creation story for my tribe, I can see when I look out in my backyard. We are part of the environment. We have been part of this environment for thousands of years. And in kind of stories about Western academic science, you do have to separate yourself from that environment. It is very kind of people heavy and people centric heavy. Species and places are resources. You heard Leja talk about how the bear is his brother. That is a very common thing for Indigenous people to feel, is that they have special places and species that are more than just a resource, and really protecting that. And I know Deb Halland also had made a comment about how when grizzly bears she was just thinking about the grizzly bears. And so being pro grizzly bear and understanding that grizzlies play a major role in every ecosystem, and that they are kind of our relatives. And so, while many people in Western academic science may not think that humans are more important, or humans are always harmful, there is this idea of elevating humans to make sure that they are always thought about in an environment, versus actually thinking that we are responsible for that environment, that we don't need to be a part of it, but we are responsible for it. For academic science, it's usually your short term. You're going to use up whatever kind of funding, whatever resource, and then you're going to kind of move on from that and switch projects. Where, as we had talked about, if we use it, it will stay with us, but if we don't, it will go away. And this is shown when if you look at certain sweetgrass research papers that have happened, they really like to be disturbed, they like to be touched, they like to be engaged with. And once you see that happening, there is a more exponential growth that happens with that. But if you leave it alone, nothing will happen. It's going to go away. So you have to build this relationship, and it's a continued relationship throughout your life, but then it's also the stories that you teach your kids for their life, and on and on and on, to make sure that these cultural species are there for futures. And so for Western academic science, it's reduce our negative impacts, passive recreation instead of use. By passive recreation, we kind of mean photography without actually delving into the actual connection of the land. Or passive really is only for fun without actually recognizing the land to which you are. And that kind of touches on Indigenous stories, which is to increase our positive relationships, active tending, reciprocity, re-indigenizing spaces, decolonizing spaces as well in moving forward. And I just kind of want to share a personal story about my own restoring in my life and kind of how ecologically that plays a part. This to the far left is my beautiful sister. And then the top middle is my cousin Casey. The bottom is my brother-in-law and his 2 kids. And then there's 3 kids. There are his 3 kids and my nieces and my nephews. This is at our annual Bitterroot dig. And this has happened every year. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it didn't happen, but it's one of the few community harvesting practices that we still do. And it is one of my favorite things to do every year. It is what I look forward to because I know that I can pass down this information to my nieces and my nephews. Bitterroot, if you haven't heard our creation story before, I'll just kind of quickly touch base on it. Bitterroot, during a time of famine for the Salish people, there was a grandma who didn't know what to do. And so she went to a creek in a little valley area, and she started to pray to Creator to help her and her people to move forward and to survive this really hard, harsh winter. And when she was crying, there was a teardrop fell through her hair and landed on the ground. And when it landed, it popped up Bitterroot. And so from the colors, and while she was crying, there was a red-winged blackbird that had flown across her when she was crying. And so the colors from the red-winged blackbird are in the flowers, and then the hair stems from her roots. And because of that, the grandma's prayer, and we became a very resilient people. Bitterroot itself is extremely resilient. It has a dormancy period in the summer, which I think is the great time for the area that is, considering wildfires usually happen in the summer. So they are able to survive kind of these harsh summers that we have. And they also require pollinators to kind of pollinate for them. So they have that environment, the interaction with the environment, usually insects, but I've also heard like through ants and bumblebees. I'll talk some more. Bumblebees and pollinators are always going to be important for the ecosystem where we are. And it's such a resilient plant. And when I see, we are considered Bitterroot Salish people because of how Bitterroot had saved our people from the famine, and how resilient we are today to still be able to harvest and practice a tradition that has happened since time immemorial is such a deep connection to people of our people that have faced a pretty disproportional historic traumas when it comes to the area where we are located, and to Indigenous people to still have a culture that is practiced by so many people is amazing. And it is a story of resilience itself. And so I always talk about Bitterroot. Bitterroot to me is a cultural keystone plant that we as a people will always have protected for future generations. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. The name Luisa Rivera comes from the idea that it can revive from a dry state. It was dry for a year, then it was planted and it could grow again. I think this is a very powerful plant for our people, and it's an annual thing. And the bottom picture is our Return to the Homeland walk. That was our 125-year forest removal from the Bitterroot Valley. And I was able to participate in this the whole time and walk, and it rained full one day. And Willie Stevens is in the front horse right there. He has guided me my whole life. And this was a really profound and resilient moment for me and my people. This kind of started my want to go to school, my want to program and to teach people about environmental education. Because I realized how amazing it is to have the culture I have based on the history that we have had as a people. And this walk, I think, was our first real big step towards re-indigenizing when it comes to environmental education. It was a push towards the public to know that we are still here, that we do have great things to offer. We are one of the most tribes that are focused on conservation and the idea of saving resources for future generations. And so that's just kind of my personal story about how traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and a kind of ecological knowledge, how that can be restored into an environmental education program. And so just kind of then, I don't want to leave you guys with just like a basic outline, but I would kind of like to help move forward with this idea of two lenses, which I know can be pretty daunting, especially when you are a non-Indigenous person. I don't want people to think that you only have to be Indigenous to use this Indigenous values that I, myself, and Lidra have been talking about this morning. I do believe that value systems are important for every single person to know, to respect your own response, the reciprocity that comes with that, and also building relationships with land, with animals, with people, with everything, with water. It really doesn't matter, but how do you then move forward? And as environmental educators, I think we all like to learn and learn new things. And so one of the things that I always find important is, especially as instructors, is that we value the many ways that learners come to understand the world. If learners feel that their religion, spirituality, or cultural knowledge are being ignored or disrespected, they might disregard scientific instructions or disengage from learning experiences. So making sure that they do understand that they have a place for their world. One is my niece, Esther, who is, she likes to call herself an Indian taco. She is half Mexican and half Salish. So she has two different, very distinct cultures that she is kind of trilingual at this point, Salish, Spanish, and English. So she is rocking it and doing it all. And then the little girl is my nephew, Najoni. And Najoni is Dene, which is in Navajo, and then English. So cultures still coming together to kind of buildings. So always remember, you may not know what the cultural knowledge. Reach out to them, see what they are learning at their own home. You know, ask them if they're learning anything that we haven't learned yet. I'm always willing to ask people that. I have great conversations with ranchers. I think ranchers know the land just like Indigenous people do. So do farmers. So learning has become, while understanding our worldviews are different, but we both understand kind of these value systems that are based. So then the next one is going to just, again, kind of, touch base on that holistic view of the environment. I think that this is probably one of the most important ones to think about because it encompasses intellectual, physical, and spiritual domains of learning, which moving forward is important when you're kind of talking to this idea of environmental education with different communities, especially with communities that are Indigenous. So it's a clear and disciplined analysis of how TAK and academic science are grounded in different worldviews. So it is important to understand that they are two different things. They are built upon two different bodies of knowledge, and that there is a mutual respect, though, within this evaluation of kind of how they are similar and how they are, and then how there could be synergy created both of them. Epistemologies, worldviews, I think are extremely important with any kind of cultural settings. And Leja and I are strong believers that everybody is Indigenous at a certain level. And it is kind of our duty then to find where we are Indigenous to. I am a quarter Welsh, and so I'm spending a lot of time now kind of learning Welsh, Welsh culture, Welsh traditions, and building upon the understanding of indigeneity. It doesn't have to be the stereotypical idea of what Indigenous communities are in either the United States or with First Nations in Canada. The next one is that these perspectives can be common to science and TAK and can help learners of all identities develop their own relationships with nature. And I think this is probably my favorite one. It's all about building their own relationship with nature. You can't force somebody to have a relationship with nature. It took me 20 years to kind of understand that I needed to have a relationship with nature, and that we should be encouraging learners that are respectful to Indigenous cultures and authentic to the instructor. And so by being respectful to Indigenous cultures, I would highly suggest reaching out to the Indigenous community where you're located. I know personally CSKT is so amazing with their environmental and reaching out and participating with school events and kind of having their own, they have a river honoring where they kind of go over different important ecosystems and resources within the tribe. They are so involved with the community that if you reach out to other Indigenous communities where you are, they will be more than happy to kind of teach you about the knowledge that they have. While you may not learn about like specific ceremonies, you may not learn the language, but at least having somebody there who can talk about the culture, who can kind of tell the language if needed, because language is, I know I only talked about the academic part of the two-eyed seeing, but if you look more into what two-eyed seeing is, it does focus heavily on the how language is a vital role in traditional ecological knowledge. Many of them are great kind of bioindicators. So a lot of the language words, when translated, kind of have an indicator for some resource. So our word for bison is kwai. And kwai is many blacks. And so when the prairie was full of bison and we used to go over to the Yellowstone area to hunt bison, that's kind of how we interpreted those bison as kwai. And so breaking down words really is respectful to those Indigenous cultures and just reaching out. And then when you combine science, TK, art, and other lenses, it can increase the fullness of how we see the world. Learning to make careful observations, to ask questions that lead to more detailed observation is key to science and to science education. I know Leja and I touched base quickly on place and how important place is. And so I will just ask you that when you think about your favorite place, what is the thing that you miss the most? It's what I tend to ask people, because that is the thing. What you're missing is what a lot of Indigenous communities have felt when they have been forcibly removed from their communities in their own homelands. And so when you yourself are able to connect kind of with that understanding of loss, that it will be good kind of have a more full vision when you kind of look at it through different lenses and different worldviews. The next one is you recognize that in Indigenous approaches, knowledge and responsibility are linked. There is no kind of separation of those values. So you kind of have to build upon protection and appropriate use of cultural knowledge, which is what I was kind of touching base on with everything that comes with talking to elders, reaching out to culture committees. Our tribe has 2 different culture committees as well. Making sure that you are including and having a seat at the table for Indigenous people. Indigenous people, having them be able to participate in any kind of restoration effort you have, trust me, will only make it better. So make sure that they do have a spot there for your education. And then, of course, when learners get the opportunities to fall in love with a variety of aspects of nature, these can lead to a relationship with nature as a whole. So making sure that when you do fall in love, Turtle has a weird idea about love and kind of emotions, and kind of love in itself indicates a responsibility. So when you find that love for that place, you then will do whatever it takes to make sure that that love and that responsibility will be there for the resource and for nature. And then again, just kind of now that I've talked about this all, I just kind of want you to think back from those original pre-survey questions. And then if they have changed, if they haven't changed, maybe who knows? It might think a little bit different about what your responsibility is to that place. Maybe that has changed. It might change how you will teach reciprocity in that place. And so this is, so lemlemch is thank you. And this is thank you in multiple languages that my cohort is a part of. And again, I wouldn't be able to do this presentation without the people that I have learned from and the information that has been passed down from me from time immemorial. And then for more information, I have done I worked with Beetles, and Beetles is a science and teaching for field instructors. I'm pretty sure all you guys have heard about them. We did a workshop called Making Observations, which delves a little bit deeper into this idea of TAK and IK into especially outdoor educational settings. So if you'd like to know more about there, read that. It's great. If you have any more questions, indianscienceshow@gmail.com, just in case we don't get to the questions where we are now.
So thank you so much. There's a lot of words. So this is just amazing. Thank you again for taking the time to do this.
It's a lot of words, sorry.
No, it's great. It's great. So we do have a few minutes to do questions and answers. So okay. I'm going to let everyone have the ability to unmute themselves or drop a question in the chat, but please feel free to, the floor is open. So who has any questions?
Oh, thank you for, lemlemch. I know it was a lot of words. We have had multiple workshops on our podcast that kind of talk about the same thing. So if you do have more questions, the NAAEE conference does have the one that me and our fellow cohort member did. I do think we did an ACES one as well. So there are opportunities for you to learn more about this. If I did talk a little bit too fast, sorry.
Oh. Annie, have you heard anything about river honoring this year?
I do think that they are working through it. I think they're just waiting for council to approve COVID procedures with it being outdoors. But I do think Stephanie said looks like it will be going on.
Oh, good. I miss it so much. And,
I do too.
I've had the opportunity to be there with Tim Ryan. And I have to say that, as a non-native, as a non-Montanan originally, walking through the landscape with tribal members has been one of the most significant ways that has permanently altered my perspective to really just change how I see science and how I see ways of knowing. And that's how it became, my passion, and how I got connected to Robin and ACES and, all the things. And so I really think that you did a tremendous job today, with all that you shared. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome, Jennifer. And
I'll be in touch soon about other things.
Good, I'm glad. I'm always interested to touch base, especially in Montana with environmental educators. I know a lot in New York, and so it's weird not knowing a lot of environmental educators where I'm from. So I'm always interested to kind of know more and to learn more. And I am a huge plant walk fan. I love plant walks, just trails, learning from other people. So I'm sure I can learn from you too now.
I may have to contact you about doing a plant walk, because I do programs here in Missoula, and I think that would and it looks like Katie is nodding for Billings.
Yep.
I think that's a fabulous idea. There is a question in the chat, if you don't mind. The question is, I already lost it. It was, oh, there it is. The slides were, I already lost it. The slides are really beautiful. Would you be willing to share your slides? I'm paraphrasing, but I can't find it.
Oh yeah, of course. And I have permission from my sisters. They know that I share their kids all the time. So everybody's got approval for everything. We are I have 19 nieces and nephews, so they can't really say no.
So what we could do is we could attach them. We could have them available on the Rose, maybe on the MEEA site, since it's probably a large file, or they could get in touch with you, Katie, directly. I'm not sure which would be best. I don't think Rose can hear me. So, okay, we'll think about how to best go about doing that. What are some other questions? I see a lot of great faces on here. We've got just another few minutes before we head off to the next session. So,
is it okay for non-Native people to harvest plants that they know might be important to Native peoples, like bitterroot?
So interesting. That is a very interesting topic, especially when you think about bitterroot. Atwin Finley, Tony Finley has made this great effort, especially in Missoula, at Fort Missoula, to reintroduce bitterroot into local places. And while you can't harvest those ones, I never really know how to answer this, because I had such a interesting life growing up, kind of away from my culture, and now I'm getting back into it, and I feel myself that sometimes I'm not even allowed to do it, and then who is allowed to do it. For bitterroot, I would say be with somebody who is a tribal member, because listen to the story about it. I only talked a little bit about it, but there is such a powerful, especially I see only women on my top bar, so it's a powerful woman creation story, because only women can initiate the prayer. Only women can talk when we are at the dig. It is such a powerful, important history that, especially for those cultural keystone plants like that, I would say yes. But if you learn about the plants, I think that's why I only do the value system. If you're able to understand the values of respect, responsibility, reciprocity when it comes to harvesting, and you are able to keep those plants for future generations, then I don't see why not. But if you are going out there with the intent to kind of take all, then I would say no. But if you do have the understanding and the principles of the honorable harvest and kind of those value systems, then I don't see why not. The issue may come if you're on where you are legally able to harvest. So I would make sure that you double check for local or public lands, private lands, federal lands. If you're on a reservation, especially on a reservation, because you may need a permit, you may need to have other things to go out. So do reach out to your community, and trust me, you won't get any bad remarks. Every Native person is so excited to have a spot when it comes to whatever you're looking for with the land, with resources.
Thank you. There's one more question in the chat. What's the best or most appropriate and respectful way for people who are not Indigenous, but who teach about specific places to incorporate Indigenous people's stories or connections to the place we are teaching?
Yeah, that's it's one of those things that I know people, especially non-Indigenous people, struggle with the idea of what is appropriation, cultural appropriation, which is extremely touching when it comes to especially Native communities that have had such a hard time with it, academics coming in, taking knowledge and then leaving and then selling that for a profit. That does become an issue. But I don't want people to get stuck up on that because the knowledge that you will be teaching isn't a ceremony. It's not Sundance. You know, it's not these very, very close knitted, it's not sweat lodges. It's not like copy dances. It's not these old scalp dances. You know, what you're learning is what we have been taught our whole lives, is the value system that comes with that. So an example that a teacher on the local area can do is kind of talk about what conservation the tribe has done. Then you can call in the tribe to talk about that conservation efforts as well. I would stay away from language. If you are a teacher that's not a tribal member, I would stay away from important ceremonies, which generally they're not going to be open to the public anyways. But if you can find knowledge that's on their website, a lot of tribes have websites, a lot of cultural committees have websites, and they provide a lot of information. But my number one thing is to reach out to your local Indigenous communities, whoever they may be, past or present. Reach out to them, and then they will kind of allow you to know what can be shared and what can't be shared regarding that culture. Because there are 576, 75 federally recognized tribes, and it's only increasing, you know, as more tribes are getting federally recognized, that it is hard to pinpoint exactly what is appropriate and what is not, because every Indigenous community is going to be different. So by reaching out to that community, you are taking away all of that fear of having some sort of appropriation happen.
Thank you. Can I ask a clarifying question on what you said? You said to not use language. What does that mean?
Yeah, so if I don't want to have non-tribal members not learn the languages, because I feel like learning the language is extremely important. But I think that if you want kids to learn, if you want people to engage with it, by having an actual tribal member say and speak the language, they can go over the history of that word, kind of the phonetics of that word. I know lots of different tribes have guattles and different phonetics that make it actually really hard to speak the language. And language is such a one of those subjects that is very hard for communities, because communities are losing languages day by day. You know, and for me, being a non-fluent tribal member, I always reach out to tribal members that are fluent, so that I'm not saying the words wrong, and I'm not pronouncing, and I'm not misidentifying what that word and what that purpose is for the plant.
Thank you. Okay, I think we should probably wrap it up. As much, I hate to do this. I'm like, oh, it tears me apart. So, but we are recording again. So if anyone wants to watch this again, which I think may happen, you've got the email. So we're gonna pause here. The next session is the Lunch and Learn. And if that will, and that again is a different Zoom link. And that one's gonna be hosted by Amanda Haggerty with the Yellowstone Forever. And she's also a MEEA board member. But again, Katie, thank you just tremendously. This was amazing.
Thank you, everyone. I do very much appreciate everyone stopping in. This is very near and dear to my own heart. And the fact that so many people are willing to listen to me blabble on about TK and IK and how that is important and how people just want a seat at the table is so thank you. So thank you. I can't thank people enough because you guys are helping my own value and my own understanding to my own indigeneity. So thank you.
Thank you.